Well, I think interestingly, whilst the euphoria seems to be, or investor euphoria seems to be very much focused on Spain, and if we narrow that bracket to opportunistic and value-add capital, which tends to dominate the investor profile, I think it's probably found itself more frustrated in Spain than it has in Italy. There has been probably more compelling repricing of assets in Italy, and probably greater traction amongst those types of investors on securing direct asset investments in Italy than in Spain. I do think, though, longer term for Italy, there are two main challenges. One is that it has for a long time until very recently had a very strong domestic investment market, and that sort of set an internal yield pricing rather than a relative yield pricing. And I think international investors quite often find that quite challenging, understanding how Italians price their domestic yields. And in order for a real estate market to have a greater depth of liquidity, it needs to have a bigger institutional investor base. It can't just be value-add funds dominating a market. They have to realize an exit at some stage. And so it's hard to see internationally where that institutional flow is going to come from. And I find it even harder to see where it's going to come domestically. Spain is seeing a resurgence, albeit overseas funded, but domestically managed in public market liquidity. Italy did always have a very deep fund market that was domestically raised and managed, but it looks quite weak at present. I think the other big challenge it faces is, in order to have a depth of liquidity, you need functioning debt markets, both in commercial and residential sectors, and those are really hampered in Italy. Quite how it's going to transfer its huge NPL books into more dynamic management hands is hard to see when it has a legal framework that makes enforcement of security almost impossible. So for me, I see positives. The increase in activity over the dearth of activity over the last few years is good for a marketplace, but it still feels like it has some way to go before it matures into a proper recovery.